Paramahansa Satrasi Srimad, His Divine Grace of High Charnarvin Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. His Kambivali Founder Charge His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Satrasi Srimad, His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Nitai Gaura Premanande. All glories to the Sum of the devotees. All glories to the Sum of the devotees. All glories to the Sum of the devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Padasavali. Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauruvani Bachani Vasisha Singhavari Pasta Chari Shatarini. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 2, entitled Remembrance of Lord Krishna, text number 5. Pulakod Bina Sarvango Munchan Miladrisha Sucha Punarto Lakshitas Tena Sneha Prasada Sampluta Pulakodbhina Sarvango Pulakodbhina Sarvango Munchan Miladrisa Sucha Munchan Muladrisha Sucha Purnarto Lakshitastena Purnarto Lakshitastena Sneha Prasara Sampluta Sneha Prasara Sampluta Pulakodbhina Sarvango Munchan Miladrisha Sucha Purnarto Lakshitastena Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Punarto Lakshitastena Sneha Prasara Sampluta Pulakodbhina Sarango Munchan Miladrisa Sucha Purnarto Lakshitastena Sneha Prasara Sampluta. Ladies, Kobhina Sarvango Munchan Niladrisa Sucha Purnarato Lakshitastena Sneha Prasara Sampluta Anko Hina Sarvango Pulaka Udbhina, bodily changes of transcendental ecstasy. Sarva Anga, every part of the body. Munchan, smearing. Milat, opening. Drisha, by the eyes. Sucha, tears of grief. Purna arta, complete achievement. Lakshita, thus observed. Tena, by Vidura. Sneha prasara, extensive love. Sampluta, thoroughly assimilated. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. It was so observed by Vidura that Uddhava had all the transcendental bodily changes due to total ecstasy, and he was trying to wipe away tears of separation from his eyes. Thus, Vidura could understand that Uddhava had completely assimilated extensive love for the Lord. Purport. The symptoms of the highest order of devotional life were observed by Vidura, an experienced devotee of the Lord, and he confirmed Uddhava's perfectional stage of love of Godhead. Ecstatic bodily changes are manifested from the spiritual plane and are not artificial expressions developed by practice. There are 3 different stages of development in devotional service. The first stage is that of following the regulative principles in the prescribed in the codes of devotional service. The second stage is that of assimilation and realization of the steady condition of devotional service. And the last stage is that of ecstasy symptomized by transcendental bodily expression. The 9 different modes of devotional service, such as hearing, chanting, and remembering, are the beginning of the process. By regular hearing of the glories and pastimes of the Lord, the impurities in the student's heart begin to be washed off. The more one is cleansed of impurities, the more one becomes fixed in devotional service. Gradually, the activities take the forms of steadiness, firm faith, taste, realization, and assimilation, one after another. These different stages of gradual development increase of love of God, These different stages of gradual development increase love of God to the highest stage. And in the highest stage, there are still more symptoms, such as affection, anger, and attachment, gradually rising in exceptional cases to the Mahabhava stage, which is generally not possible for the living entities. All these were manifested by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the personification of love of God. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Sri Rupa Goswami, the chief disciple of Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, these transcendental symptoms displayed by pure devotees like Uddhava are systematically described. We have written a summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu entitled The Nectar of Devotion, and one may consult this book for more detailed information on the science of devotional service. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshunritam Jena Tasmai Sri Nama. Ukam Grodeva Chalam Pangam Langayate Giramet Sigaram Dinataranam. Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanya Ishwaram. It was so observed by Vidura that Uddhava had all the transcendental bodily changes due to total ecstasy, and he was trying to wipe away tears of separation from his eyes. Thus Vidura could understand that Uddhava had completely assimilated extensive love for the Lord. So as we were hearing some days back, Tirtha Kurvani Tirthani Svantakstena Gadabrita, that the devotees of the Lord are verily holy places. Uddhava had been traveling to, or Vidura had been traveling, I should say, to many holy places, and he'd come upon the most holy place here in the personification of Uddhava, or the person of Uddhava, by whose association we'll be hearing and reading. He also became extremely enlivened in devotional service, and that is the association that one, and the benefit that one receives by associating with the devotees of the Lord, because their association is so exalted, so powerful, that they can travel to holy places, and simply by their association they can purify those places as well. And not that it's some artificial or some practiced level that one has to get to. As Srila Prabhupada is pointing out here, that Vidura was an experienced devotee, and he could understand, he could see by that, by his symptoms, just like if one is a doctor, he can understand by the symptoms of a particular person what his condition is. Right? Just like we're now going through this COVID experience, and there's certain precautions that are recommended, just like we're wearing masks, or we may take vaccine, or we keep some social distancing. So certain things that have to be done in order to stay healthy. But when one is infected, those symptoms, they become very apparent. And one who's experienced can recognize those symptoms. So Vidura is, here we're seeing what his position was. He was such a special devotee of the Lord, that he was exhibiting different bodily changes. And these changes were observed. Vidura was an experienced devotee. He could immediately detect that this is not ordinary, and it's not something that one practices. It's not that you do something in a certain way for such and such period of time, and then automatically you've developed into some Mahabhagwat. I remember one time we went on an engagement with the Temple Bhajan Band, and it was just south of Los Angeles here, south of the city here. And we went to one yogi's ashram, and when we came in, we sat down, we were doing some bhajan, and then the I guess you could say the sannyasi, or the head of the ashram, began to talk. But he only spoke for a few minutes. Literally, not even a few moments, actually. And then he started laughing. And for the next 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, he just was laughing. He'd laugh and he'd stop. And then he'd start laughing again. And all of the attendees, his followers, they would look at him, and then they would start laughing. So this went on for about literally 15 minutes, half an hour. And he didn't say anything. He was just sitting there, and he would start laughing, and we started laughing too. Not because we were feeling some transcendental ecstasy, but it got so you couldn't help but laugh. Seriously. And that was the whole evening. It turns out this gentleman, he was renowned as the laughing guru. And his practice was that we would, really the most enlivening thing was that we were chanting, and we had some prasadam with us. But otherwise, it was just sitting there, and then all of a sudden, somebody would laugh, and then the next person would just sort of laugh, and you could see that it was practiced. In other words, it wasn't something that all of a sudden people were feeling transcendental emotions. And it was quite funny. You couldn't help but laugh. Another time we went to an engagement up north in Salt Lake, and this one person, this guru, or I guess you could call him a guru. We rented. The big hall was rented. There were some 150, 200 people, and we started off with a bhajan, and then after we were finished, he came on, and he sat there, and then he would all of a sudden make a loud noise. He'd yell out, not anything intelligible. He would, or coherent even. Just all of a sudden he would, he'd say something, and then it'd be some silence for a few moments, and then again he would sit there and he'd yell out, and he'd move a little, shake a little, and this went on for, again, forever almost, and then the followers inside in the audience, they started doing the same thing. And this went on for quite some time, and finally, when it wrapped up, some of the followers came back to the back of the hall where we had prasadam serving out, and I asked a couple of the followers. I said, "What is your philosophy?" Well, we really don't have a philosophy. It's just, whatever you feel like or whatever you want to do. If you want to sing or dance, if you want to yell, if you want to just start talking with each other, it's just, And we got out of there. It was quite another interesting experience. But in this case, we can understand that these symptoms that Uddhava is experiencing are not artificial. As Prabhupada points out here, ecstatic bodily changes are manifested from the spiritual plane and are not artificial expressions developed by practice. It's not that so you can start yelling or laughing and jerking around, that all of a sudden ecstasy happens. But it has to be developed in the proper way. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada points out here that first stage is following the regulative principles. And Prabhupada, in this middle of the purport, he very nicely starts describing Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana, the different developments of devotional service. Sambandha being the do's and don'ts. Right? There are certain do's and don'ts that have to be there in the practice of devotional life, as Prabhupada points out here. The first stage is following the regulative principles. So there's certain do's and don'ts that we follow. And by practicing them properly, Prabhupada points out here that the second stage, or that of assimilation and realization of the steady condition of devotional service, develops. In other words, there are certain do's and don'ts, and then gradually one develops to the point of developing an attachment or a realization of what devotional service is. So there has to be some idea, there has to be some understanding. It's not just some fanatical or some practiced work. Although in the beginning, following the rules and regulations, they may seem like it's some a hackneyed or robotic activity. That may seem like that, but the fact is that the purification sets in. When the purification sets in, then you start to develop a taste. You start to be able to, you get realizations that, oh, this is, devotional life is like this. I can practice the regulative principles, or I can arise early, or I can attend certain services, or I can engage in practical devotional service, and I'm feeling a purification. I'm feeling a part of it. And then Prabhupada points out here, then the last stage is that love develops. Ecstatic symptoms begin to develop. Prayojana. That finally one develops a real taste and something that's real. And how to do this? Srila Prabhupada again points out that there's different devotional activities that have to take place. The 9 processes, Shravanam, Kirtan, Vishnu, Smaranam, Padasevanam, that all these devotional activities are there so that one can gradually become purified. Right? The impurities in the student's heart begin to be washed off by that regular practice. And the more one is cleansed of impurities, the more one becomes fixed in devotional service. Abhideya. And then finally one develops an affection, an attachment, and a genuine appreciation for devotional service. Prayojana. These different stages of gradual development of increase of love of God to the highest stage, and in the highest stage, there are still more symptoms. And Srila Prabhupada very nicely points that out in the Nectar of Devotion. He makes this point here right toward the end of the purport here, that these transcendental symptoms displayed by devotees like Uddhava are systematically described in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami states that although he has no expert knowledge about the sounds and meanings and mellows of these symptoms of ecstasy, he's tried to give some examples of different varieties of love of Krishna. And he states that there's 33 major or significant, 33 significant plus 8, or 41 significant symptoms of ecstatic love for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And these symptoms, they create transformations of the bodily activities as well as movements of the senses. But they're all based on the heart, whatever is in the heart. And they can be all accepted as feelings of the heart, Prabhupada points out. Sometimes the feelings are quite natural, and sometimes they're just temporary. The natural ones stay with that individual internally as well as externally, whereas the temporary feelings, or exhibitions, I should say, of ecstasy, they disappear, or they may fade away, or they may only stay with one for a short period of time. But for those who are advanced in the processes of devotional service, who have actually developed the genuine ecstatic symptoms, they stay, just as in the case of Uddhava here, a genuine transcendentalist. And one can detect, just as Prabhupada gives the example, as one can detect the color of dye a cloth was soaked in by looking at the cloth, so simply by understanding the different stages or signs of these symptomatic features, one can understand the actual position. So Vidura here, he's observing that Uddhava is experiencing these transcendental ecstasies, his watering of his eyes. And we also have experience within our own lifetimes. In the case of Srila Prabhupada, there are so many devotees who have accounts of observing Srila Prabhupada, whether it was in Mayapur when he was chanting Jai Radha Madhava, before Bhagavatam class he would stop in the middle of the chanting, and then some devotees who were sitting aside from him just would begin to chant Hare Krishna, and the Chaitanya Charitamrita class finished. Or if Prabhupada was in his room, you could sit next to him and you could see his eyes watering, not because he had something stuck in his eye, but because he was feeling his transcendental ecstasies. Or whether it was in Vrindavan. So devotees have so many, or when in Atlanta, Srila Prabhupada was chanting before Gaura Nitai, and he was singing this song, Nitai Pada Kamala, and Prabhupada stopped in the middle of the chanting because he was feeling such transcendental emotions. So these things they're not artificial, they're not something that's practiced, but they're there within those who have that genuine experience, both internally and externally. It may be manifested, Prabhupada points out. And these symptoms, such as affection, anger, and attachment, gradually rise in exceptional cases to the Mahabhav stage, which is generally not possible for living entities. All these were manifested by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the personification of the love of God. So all of these different emotions, as we mentioned earlier, and Prabhupada points out, are all different feelings of the heart. Sometimes they're natural, sometimes they're temporary, but those who are manifesting them naturally, they're exhibited both internally and externally. So the condition of the heart is so important, isn't it? The Bhagavatam explains, Vidyate hridaya granthis, that when that hard knot in the heart is pierced through the practice of devotional service, certain effects of modes of nature, tararajas, tamo, bhava, kama, lobha, dayas, these effects of passion and ignorance, they disappear from the heart. And at that point, that hard knot which is there in the heart is pierced by that practice of devotional life, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. So it's, again, something that has to be developed over through a process. And Rupa Goswami further describes that in his Nectar Devotion. And he discusses adoshrada tata sadhu sangata bhajana kriya. Prabhupada points that also out in this purport here, that in the beginning there has to be some faith to practice, right? That faith develops into taking initiation and engaging in bhajan. And then by that bhajan, those unwanted things, the anarthas, they're cleansed from the heart. One gradually, tatonishta ruchishtata, then gradually one develops firm faith and a taste for the process of Krishna consciousness. Ata shaktis tato bhavas, then gradually emotion and affection to the point of love, and then pure love of God, as we're experiencing here in this, and we're hearing by the example of Uddhava. So this, it's very, very fascinating purport. Srila Prabhupada just touches on it, but you can understand that he has that realization. And again, it starts from the heart. And there's some very nice examples that Srila Prabhupada gives in the Nectar of Devotion where he talks about that a hard heart is compared to a lightning bolt, to gold and to shellac. The lightning bolt is very strong and never becomes soft. Similarly, the hearts of those who are engaged in severe austerities and penances do not become very easily softened. The golden heart becomes melted at high temperature as in ecstatic love, and the shellac heart is very easily melted in slight temperature. The soft heart is compared to honey, to butter, and to nectar, and the condition of the mind is compared to sunshine. As honey and butter become melted even in slight sunshine, soft-hearted persons become easily melted. Nectar, however, is by its nature always liquid, and the hearts of those who are in pure ecstatic love with Krishna are by nature always liquefied, just like nectar. A pure devotee of Krishna is always specifically qualified with nectarian qualifications, and sometimes with the qualifications of butter and honey. So this process of cleaning of the heart is one of the most important principles in practice of spiritual life, and it's the most important principle in this movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, right? Chaitodharpanamarjanam. It's all about cleansing the heart. And when that heart is purified properly, then these symptoms, they develop and they become very natural. So, and are there any questions or comments? Brigopati Prabhu. Excuse me?
He went into ecstasy and Hamsadutta after a silence for about half a minute or so,
Yeah.
a minute. he started chanting Hare Krishna, and then
Yeah.
Prabhupada kind of came out of it and said, okay. And then they asked Prabhupada afterwards, Prabhupada, was that all right? He said, yeah, that was okay. But can you remember any other occasions when that happened, Prabhupada went into ecstasy like that?
Excuse me? Atlanta? Oh yeah, in Atlanta, Srila Prabhupada was chanting in front of Gornitai. The temple had just installed the large Gornitai deities, which were the central deities. And Prabhupada was chanting on the Vyasasana. He was looking straight because his Vyasasana was facing the deities. And as he was chanting this prayer to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda, he stopped. And then he told the devotees, just start chanting. He told them to just start chanting Hare Krishna.
I can think of another time in Atlanta at the arrival address. Prabhupada, he started off Paramakarana Pahamdvijana Nitya Gaurachanda. So these two lords, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Nityananda Prabhu, they're very kind. He said,
there's a tape
more
of that.
kind than Krishna.
There's a tape of that.
Yeah. He says, Krishna is also kind, but he demanded, first of all, surrender. And then Prabhupada starts to say, he said, but Lord Chaitanya, he didn't even demand surrender. And then he kind of started getting choked up. He paused, and then he tried to keep going. And he said, so take shelter of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then he just kind of broke up. He really couldn't speak properly. And be happy. And that was it. That was 2 minutes and 12 seconds, the arrival address. So there's another one.
Here in 75, or was it 74? I can't remember. Srila Prabhupada was here, and he was chanting, or he was giving Bhagavatam class. And in the course of the class, it's a famous class, where Srila Prabhupada talks about him trying to spread this Krishna conscious movement, and he's so thankful to all of his devotees, his disciples, for helping him in fulfilling the mission of his Guru Maharaj. And Srila Prabhupada went into ecstasy right here on the Vyasasana. So they're not artificial. These things, they're real.
Yeah, when you hear him, I wasn't personally there for him, but even when you hear him on the lecture tapes, you kind of get a little like stunned.
Yeah, I was standing right there, sitting right where Devin is sitting, and Srila Prabhupada was speaking.
Yeah, I can remember 3 others that I heard on tapes, but I can't remember much details. One at the end of a class he gave about a Jamil. He said something about Narayan, and then he went texting. And that was another time we was talking about Bhishma Dev at the end of the class. He said something like, and then there was one where he said, I can't remember what the class was about, but they started talking about the gopis and said, the gopis, they never asked anything from Krishna. And then he just kind of, that was it. He couldn't speak anymore after that, but I'm sure there might even be others. I don't know.
We went to San Francisco Rath Yatra in 74 from Denver, and Srila Prabhupada was in the original temple. They were on Market still, in the Market area. Prabhupada was chanting Jai Radha Madhava, and I was standing toward the back of the room. I didn't want to sit because I couldn't see. I wanted to see him. So I was in the back of the crowd and just standing up and just watching him. And then afterwards, as he was chanting Jai Radha Madhava, I spoke to some of the Prabhus who were there near Prabhupada, and they said while he was chanting, tears were jumping from his eyes. So
Prabhupada was the real,
we can't.
real deal.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.